I believe that almost nobody in Washington, from the left or the right, cares a darn about the blue-collar worker. They don't care about the working man. They look down, they demonize it. Right now, marriage is breaking down because nobody seems to care that we are just violating the vow that we made.
Hey, welcome everyone. I am so excited today to welcome Dr. A Markos. He's the professor of English and Scholar Residence at Houston Christian University. It's the old HBU, where he teaches a variety of courses ranging from British Romantic and Victorian poetry to the works of Lewis and Tolkien. He holds the Robert H. Ray Chair in Humanities, contributing significantly to the academic community through his extensive teaching on classics, art, and film. We'll be discussing a couple of his books today, off and on. The first one is From Plato to Christ. The other one is The Myth Made Fact. He has a number of other books on Amazon that we will link to below. But Lou, welcome. Thanks so much for joining the program.
Hey, thanks for having me on. It's a nice hot day in Houston. It's a good day to talk.
And so I wanted to start off talking a little bit about, what your writing process is, what your schedule is, because I imagine it's all up in the air, depending on whether classes are in session, if you're pitching a book, what's going on in your life. But can you sort of walk me through maybe the average day where you're actually actively writing, and then also maybe the average day whenever you have classes, you're actually lecturing?
And I'll tell you, because I've published, I think, 26 books now, and, I'm always writing. And people say, how do you do it? How do you get those books done? And, my trick, if there's a trick, is you've got to take what you're doing, you've got to break it down into chapters or essays or whatever you're writing. And for me, what really works is what I would call a series of little rewards. So I work all day. I've got something finished. I finished my chapter. Now I'll get a little reward. For me, that's often a movie because I like movies, but whatever it is, or just go out and take a walk or do something. But you've got to give yourself a series of little incentives, I found. Also, don't think of it as a book or you'll just go crazy and be overwhelmed. You've got to think of it as a series of chapters or even a series of episodes. And this is my goal this week or this day or this 2 days to get through this, and then I can move on. But you can't, just sit there staring at a blank screen thinking I'm going to write a novel today is rather ridiculous, right? So you got to keep going. The other thing that I find very helpful, and, I'm an English professor, so I think a lot about what inspiration means. I'm actually a specialist in the Romantics who talk a lot about inspiration, Wordsworth, Coleridge, Byron, Shelley, Keats, all of those. And what I believe is in the Bible, God creates the world ex nihilo, which means out of nothing. Okay. But that's not how regular creation works. Okay. Only God can create out of nothing. And I feel like in terms of inspiration, my job is to study as much as I can, to observe, to read, to interact, to fill up my head. And the inspiration, the Holy Spirit is very rarely going to put something into an empty head. Okay, so rarely is creation, boom, there was nothing there and now it's full. Usually what the lightning bolt of inspiration means is all of these ideas are in your head, and then the Spirit brings them together into some kind of new whole, new connection. To me, when I give speeches as well, the great joy of education, I'm sure you felt this, Rick, is what's often called the aha moment, right? That it's that moment when suddenly something from 3 different areas of your life or of the world or whatever suddenly come together and the light bulb goes off. And by the way, I have had thousands and thousands of those light bulb flashes, and that's why I lost all my hair, Rick. I used to have a full head of hair just like you, but all that explosion just burnt everything away. So it is a little bit dangerous. You better watch out for those light bulb flashes. So it's a matter of that. So I write a book, and then I've got to stop and do lots of reading. And reading, it's not just books. Sometimes it is, for me, movies I learn a lot from. It's that sort of experience, because you have to have enough there in your head for that new connection to be made. And I would argue it's probably the same thing in business and in science as well. It's that moment of flash. I've read some books that talk about how something like Newton or Einstein, that their discovery is almost more of an intuitive leap. So that suddenly E equals mc squared is there, but then Einstein spends the rest of his life trying to prove it, right? But the actual formula sort of almost comes together in something close to a mystical moment, like when the apple fell on Newton's head. Rick, the story is not that. It's like, oh, there's gravity. I mean, that's not. It's apparently when the apple fell on his head, suddenly he realized that maybe there was a parallel between the top of the tree and the apple on the bottom of the tree and the universe and a planet and things. In other words, it was suddenly an insight into how the universe works. Well, again, just like in science, just like in business, when you come up with a new idea for technology or communication or transportation, I really think it's the same for writing, whether it's a nonfiction book or a fiction book. And so I try to determine sort of what's my job, okay, and what is the thing that's partly out of my control. And what's out of my control is that moment of fusion and of new insight. I think you know that there's a difference between the atom bomb and the hydrogen bomb. The atom bomb is a fission bomb, right, in which the atom is split and releases energy. The fusion bomb is the opposite, where it's actually fused. And I would think that a normal person would think that a fission bomb would give off more energy than a fusion bomb, that the splitting apart would give off more energy than the bringing together. But in fact, a hydrogen bomb is 10, 100 times more power. In fact, it takes an atom bomb to set off a hydrogen bomb. We learned a little bit about this from Oppenheimer, didn't we? But so what I'm saying is that there's a great deal of energy in that new synthesis that takes place and that I think propels a lot of creativity. Then you got to go back to the hard work. Okay, but you've been kick-started with the electricity of fusion, of a new connection that wasn't there before.
You're talking about explosive synthesization. You're talking about
Again,
something,
that's what I put
a
it,
new
explosive, yeah.
creation. Yeah, and I think that's a little bit what you see in the imaginative brilliance of Einstein and Newton and Dante. I mean, all of these guys that are sort of in their younger 20s to early 30s, like that's when all the breakthroughs happen. And it seems like you have to be open to the idea that they're going to be sort of a lightning strike down into from out of nature into nature in the Louisiana sense that it can happen in your mind as well. And that's the only way that you can explain sort of this imaginative, world-shattering brilliance that happens, once every 200 or 300 years.
Yeah, it just allows you to see the world, people, community in a radically new, different way. Then there's that leap forward, and then after that, it's just marketing. But there's that leap forward.
Give me specifics. What time you starting to write? How many hours you writing? Are you using caffeine?
I'm the opposite of I'm a very late night person. So I do my working late at night. Believe it or not, I don't drink. I'm not a teetotaler. I'm an aquatoler. I drink water and that's it. So I stay away from the caffeine. If my mind is not working anymore, then I just better go to sleep or something, or watch a Marvel movie or something to relax my mind. But I'm much more a late night person, working late into the night. Working in blocks of time where I move forward and then I go on. And I'm not usually writing 2 or 3 books at the same time. Usually I've got different projects, but I'm kind of moving forward as I get into it. So I'm the night owl. I don't know if there's an actual statistic for how many writers are night owls and not. But I need to again write for a while, then rest for a while, then write again, and go in bursts like that. And of course, I do as much writing as I can during the summer because I'm not teaching then. But I'm always moving it around. Also, sometimes during the semester, it might be a little bit too difficult to write a new book, but that's when I can do a lot of editing. That's when I can do because I'll do a lot of times where I'll read a book and take lots of notes, and I'll often type up thousands of words of notes that I've got that I can refer to and different things like that. So I'm always doing that with different I'm usually doing that with primary books rather than secondary, but sometimes if it's a really important secondary work, I'll be doing that. And sometimes I won't actually go back to those notes, Rick, for 5 years, but I know pretty soon I'm going to want to write about that. So let's move in here. And, with the PhD, there's generally 3 parts of the PhD. There is your coursework, there is your dissertation, but also in humanities, there is what you call your exams, where you have to do a lot of studying, and then you take exams. And what you do for that is you make up reading lists, usually with whoever your advisor is. You make up reading lists and you work your way through that. So I worked my way through a reading list of Romantics and Victorians. I did the ancient Greeks. I did literary theory, lots of different things. And I found that I learned more from that than I did in any class, because what I was doing was reading whatever, 50 books written by romantics, British romantics. And I'm not only taking notes on those books, I'm taking cross-reference notes. As I notice a theme in Wordsworth that was in Coleridge and now is in Byron, I'm very much focusing on those connections, because that's when you're starting to understand the patterns of what makes something romantic as opposed to Victorian, as opposed to Enlightenment, Renaissance, medieval, things like that. Those ages are still pretty helpful.
Yeah, I think Charles Williams did it a whole lot. You see a lot of that in the figure of Beatrice as well, where Wordsworth and Dante, and he goes back
Yes.
and kind of looks at those connections that you would never know unless you were looking for those connections, and you had all the books out there in front of each other.
Right, and it takes time, and you have to have a library that you can access. You're not going to have every book in the world, but you've got to have those books there that you can go to right away. And you're not going to remember every single detail, but you're going to remember, and when you type up notes, it's very nice, because you can just open it up on your laptop and you can search it, by word or something, and you can find what it was. I'm looking for that theme, and you can do it really quickly. But this is a web that you build up over years and years. It doesn't happen overnight, but you just keep doing that. And, a lot of times if you read a book over again, you might have a different colored pen to take new notes, because, obviously we learn new things and we see new patterns and we keep going. And see, I've really found that that's what excites people when they're being educated, but also when I give speeches. Okay. I think one of the things people like when I do my public lectures is I like to give what I call synthetic lectures. So I'm bringing together a lot of things. And a lot of times, some of the things I'm teaching in my lectures, people know this, they know that, they know this, but they've never seen the connection between them. And I find that's what makes people excited. The other thing that always excites people is when you stop and do a little etymology and you talk about the origin of words. And it's really funny, because all these people talk about deconstruction and language is meaningless, but I don't care how much of a French deconstructionist you are. People are always, and I'm talking about little kids to old people, are always like really fascinated when you talk about, like a simple example would be, we always say God provides. Well, what does that mean? Well, the word pro means before, and the word vide is like our word video. It means to see. So provide means to see before. So God provides because he sees before what we need. You see how suddenly that etymology not only gives us an understanding of a word, but says something about God. It says something about the nature of about the nature of providence, which is, the word provide is where we get providence from, or providence is probably the first word, and then we make a verb out of it. But what I'm saying is that I find that all audiences are fascinated by that. Even younger kids are fascinated, because we have an intuitive understanding that words are meaningful. Now, I believe that just like man is fallen and just like nature is fallen, so words are fallen. That's the whole point about the Tower of Babel. Our words are fallen too, but that doesn't mean they have ceased to have any meaning. Okay? And in fact, I would argue, and others have, that poetry at its best is a sort of purification of language. It's like trying to get us back, Rick, to what they used to call the language of Adam. What was the language of Adam? That was the language by which Adam named the animals. Of course, we all know what the language of Adam is. It's the King James English, right? We know that. But that's what Henry Higgins says. You're trying to learn English, the language of Shakespeare, Milton, and the Bible, right? That's what Henry Higgins says. So that beauty, but it's an attempt to baptize language and to reach it at its purest. And I think people are fascinated by that.
Yeah, it's something about the narrative arc as well. It's something more attractive, Milton's apple versus Genesis fig. There's something more attractive there whenever you can get a little more fictional about it. And I don't know if that's just the way that we humans are, where we can sort of tease out these different ideas and we're attracted there. But somehow I always find Genesis through Milton. I never go through Genesis to get to Milton. Like I always end up in the right place.
Well, Paradise Lost is the 67th book of the Bible. It's Paradise Lost. I mean, you do know that. Yeah, it's amazing how much it is influenced. And just before you called, I was frantically trying to finish a chapter I'm writing on Pilgrim's Progress. And Pilgrim's Progress is one of those wonderful books that everybody knows, but I don't know if anybody actually reads it. I don't know if you actually sat down and read it, but people know it because images like Vanity Fair and putting his fingers in his ears and screaming salvation and the celestial city and all. I mean, those images stay in people's minds, even if they haven't read the book. I don't think anybody's ever actually read Robin Hood, but we all know that story. It sort of stays in, or Don Quixote. Very few people have actually read that book, but it's in the mind there, and it's a matter of images and how images speak to us. And again, I mean, what's his name? The great Neil Postman, amusing ourselves to death. I mean, he was right that there is a problem when the age of literacy gave way to the age of television. But we are also visual creatures. Okay. I mean, obviously, I am very much a fan of real literacy and words and how important words are. But we don't want to just completely dismiss images because images are important and we think through images and we think through symbols. It's really interesting, Rick, because I grew up in the Orthodox Church and God moved me into the Baptist Church. And when I was a college student back in the 80s, I knew so many people who were Catholic, Orthodox, Anglican, and they were becoming Baptist, Presbyterian, evangelical. Now, a lot of my best students who have grown up Baptists are now becoming Catholic. My daughter just became Catholic about 4 months ago, are becoming Catholic Orthodox. And I think the reason is that there's a hunger for sacrament. And sacrament is image based, right? It's not just image based. It's seeing, smelling, tasting, touching, right? Sometimes they talk about high Anglicans as believing in spells and smells. Have you ever heard that, Rick? The importance of the full experience. Baptist churches, I mean, we're lucky if we have a stained glass window and it's usually abstract, so it doesn't look like anything. We kind of strip things down. Where I think this generation is more and more hungry for narrative. Okay. And of course, that narrative is both verbal and visual. But I think we need both to make the story and our participation in the story come alive and real and visceral to us.
Yes, yes. To feel the wetness of the water, to taste the imaginative fount, to be able to get the sense that the senses themselves are important. Like it's like I was visiting a church. We just got done spending a month down in Florida, and I visited a church down there. It had amazing lights, like the light show. I'm like, this guy's worshiping. This is a real art form. I never considered that before. I thought it was just the smoke and the lights to draw the young punks in. But he was beautiful. Lou was beautiful.
Where was that in Florida?
Just outside of Sarasota, actually in Sarasota First
That's
Baptist.
what I thought. I was just in Tarpon Springs a couple of weeks ago. Tampa, Florida. Tarpon Springs are the Greek sponge docks. My family's Greek. I wonder because there's a guy in South Florida who's been very generous with missions, and he's an eye doctor. I can't remember his name. I wonder if he had any part in this. Because South Florida is very strong with kind of mission movements and things. And Sarasota's a beautiful place. Did you go to the Ringling Museum?
I did not. I pass it every single day.
Make sure you go next time. You have to go. I mean, not only the great museum of the circus, but there's the house of this rich lady that's beautiful, and there's also an art museum that has Rubens and all sorts of great things. But you're right. The play of light. I mean, when you read Dante's Divine Comedy, it's a journey into light, greater and greater light as it. And again, it's kind of an amazing thing that that the pure light is white, but that white light contains every other color. I mean, Newton was figuring out all of that at the prism and things as part of his discoveries in science. And understanding that is just quite amazing. But, we do. And, I like to read, the books about, people that have near-death experiences or life after life. One of them called Imagining Heaven or Imagine Heaven, again, talks about these people. One of the things they remember the most are the lights and the colors they never even thought were possible. Sometimes blind people have an NDE and talk about the colors, which is really kind of amazing, right? But yes, you're right. There is something that we miss, and we also miss the beauty of the stars because of what's called light pollution. You can't. This is Houston. You can't see a star. When you do, it turns out to be an airplane or something. So I mean, maybe where you are, you're far enough north. Is it a little bit less light pollution? I don't know.
A little bit less. Not too.
you're not too far from the Renaissance Festival. Go out there at night. That's just beautiful.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, it's a
Yeah,
beautiful
yeah.
place. Again, you're right. Some of it is just silly consumerism, but there is a true kind of spectacle, if you will. I mean, when you read Dante's Divine Comedy, there are parts of it when he goes to paradise that are literally like a light laser show. It's unbelievable. When I read it now, it's like, did he see a laser show? Like they have a really neat one down in San Antonio, Fiesta, Texas, with a laser show against the moon. I don't know if you've ever seen it. I mean, that's kind of what it feels like when you're reading it. It's fascinating.
Yes. It's funny you say that. So Dante, last year, my wife and I, we had our 20th anniversary, and we took a boat trip. It was a 10 stop trip, and one of the stops was Florence, where you disembark and you travel up to Florence. And I knew about that about 6 months in advance. I thought, well, what do I want to be reading? And so I decided I would read straight through the Divine Comedy, read straight through the trilogy. And so I timed it so the morning that we were to disembark to go to Florence, I finished the end of the third one. I finished that, I guess, the 100th concert or whatever it is. And so, but I was struck. I expected Paradiso to be the best of the three. Now I'll read Florentine Italian, but just my English translation, it seemed to me Inferno was far superior than the other two.
Well, I mean, we can identify with Inferno much. I mean, the farther up Dante gets, language almost fails him. How do I put this in words? I mean, Inferno is so concrete. I mean, a lot of people get mad. For instance, Muhammad is in hell, and there are a lot of very strict Muslim countries where they burn Dante in effigy every year. And the thing is that it's so concrete, and you swear Dante went there. It's just a dream. I didn't actually go into the Inferno, but you can't help but take it as if it were a real trip, because Dante he has a way of, and he also has a way of explaining how we perceive things. I mean, it's very good. But you're right; it gets harder and harder. It gets more and more ineffable as we move upward into there.
Yes, yes.
Especially the beautiful etchings by Gustave Doré, Dore. You can get it real cheap on Amazon. And again, he just tries to capture the light and light that grows as we go into paradise. But we're also going into a world we know less about. We know about the Inferno. We've seen that all the time, unfortunately. But paradise, we're not used to that kind of ineffability as it's moving beyond that. Something.
And what struck me is sort of the words of Lewis. I'm gonna keep sort of teasing Lewis here because I know you're a Louisiana expert here. But this idea of, it's the sort of story that you would not have guessed. The idea of Satan's wings fluttering and it'd be cold, chilly ice, sort of at that deepest, darkest level. Not the serenity of the warmth there. It's what you would not have guessed.
You're right. Yeah, that the center of hell is ice, because the worst sins, which to him is treachery, the traitor is the worst sinner of all, and they are so cold-hearted that there's no love. That people are often amazed, especially Baptists, are amazed that Dante considers the least bad sin to be carnality. Now, it's still a sin, okay, but at least there's some element of love there. It's still twisted and corrupted, and everybody's in hell, but there's an element. But once you get to the bottom of the Inferno, where all the traitors and betrayers and things like that are, there's no love left. It's gone. And he's got a great deal of detail, because Satan is encased in ice, and he keeps moving his wings to try to escape from the ice. But the more he does it, the more cold air he puts on it, and the ice gets thicker. So his very attempt to escape has made him even more a prisoner, which is just brilliant.
Every single level as you descend, your own sin is the punishment on yourself. My pridefulness is punishment on myself, and I'm ignored forever. I'm ignored for eternity. It's like the only thing like you would not have invented. Dante thought of it all.
Yeah. Oh no. Have you ever read The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's like a miniature Divine Comedy. It's like 120 pages or something. And yet, because Lewis, like Dante, understood what I like to call the psychology of sin. That sin destroys itself, and it sort of ties itself in knots. And every time we sin, we're literally giving away part of our humanity until there's nothing left. I like to say, after Lewis, the problem with the people in hell is not so much that they're beyond God's grace. God's grace is unlimited, but there's nothing left to save. And we can do that. We can almost dehumanize ourselves. But I'll tell you the sins that do that more than anything: envy, bitterness, and resentment just devour you until there's nothing left. So you become a sort of caricature of yourself. And it's terrible. It's terrible, but it turns us inward in knots, and we won't let go, and we can't grow. We make our, as C.S. Lewis likes to say, the door of hell is locked on the inside. How he put, the gates of hell are locked on the inside.
So I will share this with you since I think it just got edited out of my book. I have this theoretical battle, and so I'm trying to build, and this ties in, I think, perfectly for the conversation where we ideally want to go, this epic battle. And so I've got to create these two best battle possible types of figures. So number one, I'm going to create the worst possible man, and I'm going to use Dante's Inferno to build that man. Use Dante's Inferno each level as a training ground to be able to build that man.
Wow. Huh.
And then on the other hand, when I want to build the best possible man, I'm not going to go into scripture. I'm going to use Republic 5, Plato, about the most just man, and which obviously that's reflected in Isaiah 53. And I'm going to build these two men side by side, and then I want to have them do battle. That all just got removed, so I got to figure out. I'm going to recycle that at some point. But I'm trying to think, like, outside of scripture, how are we thinking about the worst of the worst and the best of the best? And are there places that we could go in ancient literature, in the classics, that we can sort of identify, like, what are the proving grounds of how you make a great man versus an evil man?
If you start with Plato, what you were mentioning, Plato creates, sort of theoretically, a perfectly just man and a perfectly unjust man. But here's the twist. The perfectly unjust man has convinced everybody that he is just. Whereas the perfectly unjust man, people turn against him, they betray him, they kill him. Now, it reads like a prophecy of Christ. Plato had in mind Socrates, his own teacher, who was a just man that they turned against and, used him as a scapegoat, put him to death. But what's brilliant about Plato's Republic, and you can begin there, is that Plato shows how in the end, that perfectly just man, the perfectly unjust man that everyone thinks is just, ends up the weakest and most enslaved person of all. Because if you get to a point where you are an absolute tyrant, then nobody tells you what to do, right? You don't obey the law. You don't obey virtue. You don't obey the Bible. You don't obey any holy book. You don't listen to any church or synagogue. Right? You don't listen to anything. Well, the only thing you can listen to then is your own base desires and lusts. And our own lusts and desires always end up impelling us to do things that are self-destructive. So what happens is that the greatest tyrant of all is a slave to the worst of all taskmasters, the lusts which make you destroy yourself and destroy everybody around you, right? Where the other person may be killed, but he is free on the inside. We need to build virtue. If you read both Republic and you read the Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle, they identify it as the four classical virtues: courage, or also known as fortitude in Latin, temperance or self-control, wisdom, often called prudence, and justice. And they understood many people have heard this, but Aristotle talks about virtue as the mean between the extremes, right? So the virtue of courage, right? Courage is obviously not cowardice, right? Cowardice is a lack of courage. But courage is also not, Rick, can you think of a word that might mean an excess of courage in a negative way?
Aggression.
What's that?
Kind of aggression.
Good, like an aggression, a kind of impulsiveness, cockiness that runs in without thinking, right? See, a lot of times Americans have a wrongful view of courage. They think of what they call the berserker, the guy in a war that goes wild, just killing everybody. That is not the classical definition of courage. And in fact, if you ask people in the military, ones you could trust, less of those people today. We won't go there. But if you talk to military people that you can trust, they will tell you that the berserker is the worst possible person. They end up causing destruction. That is a person that has lost any sense of right and wrong, and they end up killing everybody else around them. So they're not good. They don't want a berserker like Achilles in book 22 and book 20, 21, and 22 of the Iliad is a berserker. That's not good. That's not courage. Courage has to have a kind of wisdom and temperance to it. So virtue has to find that. That's why the virtue of temperance, obviously, it does not mean being some college frat boy and drinking out of your mind, but it also doesn't mean being a super ascetic who does nothing else. It's the proper balance between the two extremes. Virtue is not just for the ancients and for the ancient and medieval theologians that knew well as well. Virtue is not just a list of do's and don'ts. Virtue is a proper kind of balance. So you are in the proper balance and harmony with yourself, with God, with the universe. Now, I don't want to sound New Age here, and it's not New Age anyway, because if you're a real Christian, you believe God created the cosmos as well as us. So that idea of balance is not necessarily a New Age thing, as we say today. It is the proper understanding of being aligned. That's why I think Catholic theologians, I think, understand this better than Protestants, that there is such a thing as a proper, the desires themselves are not the ones that are sinful. It is when our desires become disordered. Augustine talks about this.
Okay.
Properly ordered desires. That's virtue. Notice when Jesus speaks to the woman at the well in John chapter 4, the woman who's had 5 husbands and is now living with a man that's not her husband. Notice that Jesus does not condemn her for her desire itself. She does have a good desire to seek acceptance, to seek, all of it. But the problem is not the problem is that she is fulfilling that desire in a destructive way. She has a disordered desire that is putting her in the wrong way. There is a right way and a wrong way to fulfill that desire, right? But it's not so much the desire that's wrong. It is our method of seeking to fulfill that. And this is what happens with Dante. He keeps falling off track. In the middle of my life, I woke to find myself lost in a dark. I don't know how I got there, but somehow I fell off the true way and can't get myself back on the true way because C.S. Lewis wrote a allegorical testimony called The Pilgrim's Regress, which is one of the hardest books. Did you actually read it, or you've heard of it?
I've skimmed it.
What happens is that basically it begins when this character named John has a vision of these old men on an island. They're discussing, they're contemplating, and he's filled with a yearning and a desire to seek after that city. But he keeps going astray because he keeps seeking what he thinks will fulfill his desire, but it doesn't. It just twists it in the wrong direction. And so in some ways, that's Pilgrim's Progress too. That's the life that we're on. Are we going to stay on track, or are we going to just keep falling off the right way into things that, morality aside, they're actually self-destructive. They don't do us any good. They just get us trapped with our own vices. And everybody understands addictive behavior if we're talking about, sex and drugs or something. But, envy is addictive. Anger is addictive. Jealousy and resentment, all of these things. I mean, even good health can become unhealthy if it becomes an addictive idol that, these poor people. I mean, like you see these vegans that look like skeletons. It's like, are you really healthy? I don't think so. It's crazy stuff. Like anything,
Yes.
Nothing to excess, right? There's the golden mean of Aristotle, and we need to be careful or we will put ourselves in a box. And you can always tell when the addiction is happening because you start looking down on anybody that doesn't follow your I mean, good things, exercise, eating properly, whatever, but you start looking down and then later on you become obsessed with it and you don't actually take any joy out of it. Because you've become your own slave master, right? So,
yes.
sometimes, Rick, the good things are worse than the bad things. I mean, I hope most people, will finally wake up to the promiscuity and drug addiction is not leading anywhere. But again, if you're doing something good, like health or whatever, that even Solomon, the wisest man ever, said, too many books over wearies the mind. You can even become addicted to that. if you're not careful, and again, lose your humanity.
You're beginning to sort of set up this idea of sort of the fractal activities of man that happen across not, similar things that happen across all men in different proportions, but also things that happen across different time frames. We mentioned the Isaiah prophecy that then is followed by the Plato Republic 5 prophecy about the most just man, and then you have the fulfillment of Christ. Of course, the fulfillment of Christ also is the fulfillment of the action of the mediator in the Achilles that you just mentioned, which also Alexander the Great was the God-man. And the irony that you mentioned, John chapter 4, that the only other thing that happened important in Samaria was Alexander the Great came through there probably after he visited Janus the high priest. What was he doing? He was searching for the fountain of youth. And Christ shows up and says, I will give you water that you'll never have to come back to the fountain again. I'll give you living water.
The real fountain of youth.
And so you begin to see this triangulation from the most powerful man ever, Alexander, coming through there, and the weakest woman possible there, and then the man, the God-man, who stretched the breadth and the mediation of all those, Alexander, the man who claimed to be the mediator, but it was not, and Christ, who was the true mediator, all meeting in the exact same spot. The only problem was Alexander prophesied when he was still praying in Macedonia about going to that area and what he would see in that area. Only problem is he was 300 years early. And so you sort of have this Yeah. Have you ever heard that story by any chance?
I hadn't heard that story. That's interesting.
So William Whiston, I think he's a 1700 writer, Eusebius, and I think he says that Josephus actually writes about this a little bit as well. So Alexander's on his tear, and it's obvious rumored he's looking for the fountain of youth or whatever it might be. This may or may not be true, but so he approaches the walls of Jerusalem. He approaches the walls of Jerusalem with his military there, and the king, Janus the high priest, is inside praying, Lord, what am I going to do? These people are going to take us. They're going to just destroy this. And God tells him, open the gates, put on your royal vestments, have the other priests wear this, and open the gates and welcome the king in. And he opens the gates in at the feet of Alexander. Think about Egypt and the walls of water. This is all reflective of that. He opens the gate, and Alexander looks at the high priest, and he says, I know that man, and he bows to the high priest. And I think is it Pavanius? I forgot his right hand name. One of his commanders comes up to his Alexander, what are you doing? Why are you worshiping this Jew? This is not a guy. He said, I'm worshiping because it's God, because when I was in Macedonia, I was alone and I was praying at night, and the man that I saw in my dreams was the man that bared the sign that was on the forehead of that man that I just saw. And so I am worshiping the God that's reflected in that man. And so he gets up, Alexander gets up and enters the gates of Jerusalem. He then proceeds up into the temple with the high priest. The high priest makes sacrifices to God for Alexander the Great. Now, they both had visions, right? The reasonable thing would be for the Janus to close the gate and for them to attack. And if they were to attack, they were never going to see that this Janus was the person that he dreamed about years and years ago. And so they're sitting in the temple. And the high priest begins reading Daniel. I think it was Daniel chapter 7, and Daniel chapter 8, and Daniel chapter 9. This idea where all the kings of the earth will throw their thrones and throw their crowns down. And Alexander identifies, that's me. That's me. And because of this, I know that I'm able to beat Darius. And then he leaves there, worshiping after giving his sacrifice. He leaves there and goes on to conquer the rest of the world. It's said, I personally think he probably traveled through Samaria, because I know he went through there because he installed I guess the leader of that temple up on the mount that where the woman worship, and of course Samaritans later killed him, and he tore down all that out there. But you have this nature of Alexander the Great bowing to the high priest in William Whiston's reports. That is just sort of interesting because it's the inversion of what you would have expected, and both he and the opponent had to do the inversion of what you expected. They did the not wise thing, and the only reason they did the thing, they both lived.
Right. Wow. I mean, it's in Daniel when Nebuchadnezzar dreams of the giant. I mean, the head of the giant is Babylon, and then the next thing is Persia, right? And Cyrus, of course, is named by name in Isaiah, right? And so these are clearly important figures. And then the third kingdom is clearly Alexander the Great. And what comes out of him. And, it's because of Alexander the Great that the Koine, or common Greek, became the lingua franca. And that, of course, is what first the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament and then the New Testament written in Greek, all of it because it was unified by Alexander the Great. And, it's really funny because a lot of people think of Alexander the Great as conquering the West. But the only part of Europe that Alexander conquered was Greece. His entire kingdom was Asia and part of North Africa. It's the Romans who are going to take over the entire, European Mediterranean world. So we kind of, forget that that God used Alexander just as much as he used Cyrus or used Caesar Augustus afterwards. That's interesting. I'll have to look into that story. I hadn't heard that specific one. Usually they switch and move right on and talk about him getting to Egypt and things because he moves very quickly. I mean, the Bible does prophesy the destruction. Is it Tyre or Sidon? I think it was Tyre. And that's the one where Alexander fulfilled the prophecy by building this bridge and completely tearing down this city that the Bible had spoken of being torn down completely. And that was something that Alexander fulfilled. It was amazing. He built a causeway. They were like a little island, and they thought they were impregnable. And so Alexander just built a causeway, marched over, and destroyed them. Just like Julius Caesar built a bridge over the Rhine, went over, defeated the Germanic tribes, and then burnt down the bridge. It's unbelievable.
I think this is probably a good place to sort of jump into the idea of Platonic forms as well, because what the Jews were saying was, I have a protector. My protector isn't the walls. It's the invisible thing that makes that's the sort of the eternal ideal of what a wall, what protection should be. Same sort of thing with the walls in Egypt. Like, why would you ever have the weakest potential nature of slaves defeat the most powerful enemy army in the world, in the Egyptians, and do that twice? You sort of have this symbolic idea that the physical walls are representative of a higher ideal there.
With Plato, right? Plato's famous for the theory of the forms, right? That in our world, we have individual things, an individual book, an individual dog, an individual house. But up in heaven, what he called the world of being, we have the ultimate absolute forms of those things. Book with a capital B or cat with a capital C, right? And it's not just things, it's ideas. Down here, we have, lots of goodness and truth and beauty, and some of it can be very relative, but all of it is coming out of an absolute form. Goodness with a capital G, truth with a capital T, beauty with a capital, justice with a capital J. And this idea, some people say that's crazy, but that concept is actually defended in the book of Hebrews. Now, I am not saying that the author of Hebrews read Plato. I'm just saying that when you read Hebrews, it becomes obvious that Plato got something right, okay? And what he got right was, amazingly, Hebrews says that the temple in Jerusalem is ultimately a shadow or an imitation of the true temple that's in the throne room of God. And Moses was given a vision of that true and eternal perfect temple, form of the temple, we can call it. And that was the model by which he built the earthly one, right? But we're moving, and that when Jesus died, he not only went through the earthly temple, he went through to the eternal temple and cleansed that. I mean, so it's like, oh, wow. Now, here's the difference, Rick, okay? Sometimes it's really more Neoplatonism than Platonism. Sometimes our world gets reduced to shadows and nothing. Now, that's not true. Our world is real. It was actually created good. But even C.S. Lewis, in the last chapter of The Last Battle, The Chronicles of Narnia, farewell to Shadowlands, right? It's not that our world is literally a shadow, but that compared to the thundering, concrete reality of heaven, it is like we're living in a shadow, right? It's a compare. When Jesus says, you can't follow me unless you hate your father and mother, obviously we can't take that literally because that would go against the commandment to honor your father and mother. But our allegiance to God should be so pure and complete that in relation to that, it would seem like but not literally, we're not told to hate them, right? But Plato is understanding that, I don't know if you think about this, Rick. It sounds like you think about these things. Why is it that whenever we speak about God or heaven, we tend to use negative language? In other words, we are corporeal, God is non-corporeal. Earth is physical, heaven is non-physical. No, heaven is not heaven is trans-physical. Now, unfortunately, the word trans has been ruined. But the proper understanding of the word trans is, if anything, God is trans-corporeal. He's not less than, he's more than. We're personal. That doesn't mean God is impersonal. God is transpersonal. He's more than. And heaven is, now, again, according to the Bible, right, there will be a period when we will be disembodied, right? Like if I die now, I'll be in heaven, right? Because I'm awaiting the resurrection of my body. But the final goal of things is a new heaven and a new earth when we are in resurrection bodies that are, again, not unphysical, they're transphysical, they're physical, but more than that. And again, sometimes we get so mystified by shadows that we forget that, yes, this world is real, but in comparison to heaven or the New Jerusalem, it's not that, it's more insubstantial compared to that. And we have a hard time because we live in a post Enlightenment world where we think, look, here, this is what's crazy, Rick, okay? The old meaning of the word realism is very different than our meaning today. In philosophy, realism is opposed to nominalism. Now, I'm using big words, but they're important words here, okay? Realism is the belief, it goes back to Plato, but it was believed by the greatest medieval theologians like an Aquinas. Realism believes that behind our words and ideas is something real and absolute. So behind our words is a real meaning with capital M. Behind our attempt at truth is a real absolute truth with a capital T in the heavens. That's what realism used to mean. The opposite of that is nominalism. Think of the word anonymous, no name, or a nominal fee, which means in name only. Nominalism means that the words we use, and they're just names. There is no reality behind them. That leads to that leads to Nietzsche. But oddly, there are some Christians that sometimes will fall into this idea of nominalism that leads to relativism, that leads to postmodernism. Again, yes, in our world, we're not going to have perfection. But behind that is a real, and I talk to evangelicals, and a lot of them, I can get them on board with absolute truth and absolute goodness, but they balk at absolute beauty. Oh, everything is in your mind. I mean, we're so crazy about this. I wrote a book called Restoring Beauty, the Good, the True, and the Beautiful in the writings of C.S. Lewis. And I started by attacking the movie Shrek, where the princess becomes ugly at the end. And I got attacked by a lot of people. Oh, no, it's good. We have to teach our daughters that beauty's not important. Beauty's not important? What are you, an idiot? Beauty's very important, okay? Now, that doesn't mean we give way to the Madison Avenue idea of beauty that tries to tell us what beauty is, right? But beauty, I'll bet, Rick, you've heard people quote, beauty will save the world. It's a quote from
Dostoevsky, yeah.
But again, the idea is not that the world's going to be saved by a cute girl in a cute dress, okay? We're talking about there is such a thing as beauty, as a perfect harmony and balance that we point towards. And our embrace of what I call the cult of the ugly has been very destructive of our society. This embrace of ugliness, that's insane, okay? We deal with the fact that there's brokenness in this world. That's like saying because some people are born with no legs that we should go around and break the legs of healthy people. I mean, we're kind of moving towards that.
Crazy, yeah.
There's a sickness in that, a rejection of beauty, particularly a rejection of beauty in its masculine and feminine forms. We saw that with the Olympics, okay? A breakdown of that kind of beauty and aspiring to that beauty is again, it's just very, very odd. I don't know what we've done. I guess we still somewhat respect the beauty of strength in our athletes, but that may go away too. I don't know. It's very odd. It's like we're in flight from that beauty. Even the beauty that's within us, we're sometimes in flight from it. And that's there's something very unhealthy about that.
Yes, yeah. And I think just to add a little bit more there, that this idea that what actually is shadowed, and we were speaking about Jonathan Pageau before we started the recording. His brother Matthew has a great book, The Language of Creation. He says that meaning shadows forth matter.
Oh,
meaning
wow.
shadows
Good.
forth matter. Wow. And I kind of like that of course, as an Orthodox guy. Yep. And I kind of like that it just kind of shadows forth matter, but it's the meaning. It's kind of the capital M meaning, and of course he gets around to personalizing that as a person, as a truth. You should ask what is truth. You ask who is truth from a technical perspective. But then I think is it Phaedo that where there's this idea there's these sort of three ideas of what beauty is, sort of this.
Oh yes, so claritas and I'm trying to remember. It's got to do with harmony and clarity.
It's like the paradigm blue beauty. Then you have a beautiful person that it participates in beauty, like they're of course sort of a component of beauty, right? And then you've got this idea of beauty, which is sort of all the addition. You add all sort of the smaller beauties up, and that equals capital B beauty,
right?
Which I obviously reject, because you look at truth and you look at love. Like, truth is more than a series of facts, and love is more than a collection of likes. Those things are more. They're not additive. They're not even multiplicative. They're something higher and truer. They're transcendental.
I'll tell you, one of the best ways to understand modernism and why we need Plato to get us centered again is before the Enlightenment, people had a top-down view of reality. Now we have a bottom-up view. So what does that mean? A top-down view means that the origin of everything is ultimately spiritual, right? But spiritual, not having, again, we've taken spiritual and make it mean ghostly. That's not what spiritual means. Something that is more real, that is eternal, right? That is beyond, that transcends. And out of that comes matter and comes our world. And people turned it around. Bottom up says, no, the origin of everything is physical, natural, material. That's what we've done. And that's become what's called methodological naturalism, where like, for instance, I don't care if God existed. We have to prove that everything has an origin in matter. And of course, that's why Darwinism is so important to the mind. I don't know if you've noticed, but Freud has been discredited. Marx has been discredited. The only person that's not discredited is Darwin, because if you're a modernist, you cannot let go of Darwin, because he's absolutely essential, because he gives you a creation myth. How can you take seriously a modernist worldview when you can't even explain how you got here? Okay. Now, I would argue, though, that where Darwin gave us a model that seemed to give us a way to get our body here by just completely physical facts in nature, I believe that what Freud did is try to find a way to evolve the soul. He didn't call it soul, he called it consciousness. People don't understand that Freud is not saying we have the conscious mind and it creates the unconscious mind. For Freud, the unconscious mind is primary. It is physical, it's material. And out of that comes consciousness. Look, Freud wrote a book called Moses and Monotheism, where he said, well, what Moses did is he just took his earthly father and projected it and invented a heavenly father. I would say no, that what makes a lot more sense is that there's a heavenly father, and earthly father is a earthly reflection of that. Why else do you get some poor kid that grows up with a terrible father? How does he even know his father is terrible? Because I think we have imprinted in us an understanding of divine fatherhood, of which our earthly fatherhood is a reflection or an image. Sometimes a good one, sometimes a terrible one. Okay, but I think it was Chesterton that liked to say, not facts first, but truth. We don't move up from facts to truth. We start with truth and move down to facts. That's what, and even like Karl Marx had a pyramid view of things. He said, at the base of everything was the means and modes of economic production. And on the basis of that, you build the political and the structural. And on the very top comes religion and consciousness. Marx actually taught that human consciousness is a product of physical, material forces over which we ultimately have no control. People don't understand what they're saying. Not just do economics create a government, they actually create our consciousness of that government. People don't realize how really anti-humanistic Marxism and those other ideas are.
Yeah, and the free market capitalist ideal, and I personally find that in the Austrian economist Ludwig von Mises, for instance, his book Human Action, I think around page 167, 168, he has this great takedown of Darwin. And it's probably one of the most savage takedowns I've ever seen. This idea that, if you say that the man who's out in the economy just trying to create value, trying to accrue wealth, that he's a greedy man, we don't realize he has to cooperate. He can't just destroy everyone and take everything. He has to get reciprocal gamesmanship. Like, I got to have friends, I got to have allies there. If we're going to go hunting lions, like, We got to do it as a pack. We can't just go one man at a time. And it's a takedown of this idea of survival of the fittest. And he attacks Darwin head on, and he thinks he can do it from an economic standpoint, the human action standpoint. It's clear that it is.
Yeah, the free market only works with basically virtuous people. That's what, I understand why Pope Francis has spoken against capitalism. He is from Argentina, the origin of the worst crony capitalism, which is what we're heading towards right now in our country. But it doesn't work. If you cannot look, I mean, right now, marriage is breaking down because nobody seems to care that we are just violating the vow that we made. Right? In other words, we're going to throw it out. Can you imagine having no fault divorce in a business? Can you imagine if you started a business with somebody and the guy said, Rick, I just don't like you anymore, so I'm leaving, but I'm taking half the business with me. Can you imagine that? Maybe, I don't know, maybe that's happening in business already. I don't think it does. Okay, but what I'm saying is it only works because people hold to the vow they took. Pretty soon, I don't care how many contracts you sign in a business, when people completely lose any kind of virtuous, morally self-regulating ability, it all falls apart. I don't care how many rules you make. You have to have a morally self-regulating people. And the same thing goes, by the way, for democracy and republics. They only work as long as people are morally self-regulating. So it is problematic. And I mean, Darwinism leads directly to the Holocaust. It also leads directly to eugenics, leads directly to, who was the Planned Parenthood lady? Margaret Sanger.
Yeah.
Again, directly comes out of a eugenic idea of perfecting the race. I mean, the Khmer Rouge, Pol Pot, all of this sort of stuff is coming out of this idea. It's really weird, but the great G.K. Chesterton said, who would have thought that the doctrine of original sin would actually protect us from horror? Now, that sounds weird, but it's only once you reject original sin, that means that the problem with man is ignorance and poverty. That means the problem with man is bad socialization. So if we can completely change society, we will perfect man. What happened, starting with the French Revolution, is, but you know what? There are certain people that cannot be reprogrammed. They're so corrupt that all we can do is eliminate them. Whether those people are called Jews, they're called gulags, they're called intellectuals, whatever that. We wipe them out, and then we start all over again. And all of that comes from this Rousseauian notion that man is by nature good. You would think that would make for wonderful things, but it actually has caused great destruction. And the great Solzhenitsyn said, the dividing line between good and evil does not run through parties or nations or ideologies. It runs through the heart of every human being. It would be so nice if there was one big bad guy, okay? It doesn't work like that. We don't live in a world where there's one simple evil Dr. Moriarty, and if you kill him, all the crime ends. It doesn't work like that, okay? That corruption is in us, right? And then we join into that corruption. So, like I said, but people don't understand that. Like I said, capitalism has been corrupted, but it only can work if you can trust. It's funny that the Dutch in the Netherlands have become so amazingly liberal because they used to be very conservative. They pretty much invented international capitalism. That's back in the days when they were very, very virtuous and virtue-minded. Okay, and there's still a lot of great ideas that come from a guy named Abraham Kuyper, who was the prime minister of the Netherlands about 100 years ago, and talked about, again, this idea of virtue and sphere sovereignty. We can go into that all. But again, it's, I mean, as you're seeing, virtue has ramifications on economics, right? Economics don't create virtue. Virtue creates economics, whether it's going to be good or bad.
Yes. And Cavito says, I think he says that it's the highest vow that makes all the other vows and all the other covenants work. Like if you get the highest vow right, sort of the rights and the proper virtues cascade down and then make all the other covenants work and other vows work. And you see that at play. You mentioned the French. The French tend to do everything bad. They did the Olympics horrible. They embraced the Nazis like the most evil possible thing. And they destroyed philosophy for 100 years. I mean, they did all these things, but there's always sort of that messianic figure, that Charles de Gaulle who's waiting offshore with the true French. The true French are getting ready to invade, and they're going to come in and they're going to replace those fake French who embraced the Nazis, who opened the bars, who married them, who welcomed them, who assumed that the savages that invaded were going to be there forever. We're going to set up our home. We're going to embrace the evilness. No. Those are not the true French. The true French are waiting offshore, ready to invade, and they've got someone like a Charles de Gaulle at their helm. And that's the way I view a lot of these ideologies, Lou, is like there's a messianic figure out there, there's an archetype out there ready to invade. We just have to identify who it is.
I mean, there are more true Catholics in Africa right now than in Europe. That's for sure. Yeah. I mean, you know what? I mean, we talked about the opening Olympics, the opening ceremony of the Olympics, and of course they knew exactly. Jonathan Peugeot explained very well what they were doing with the Lord's Supper. But actually, the whole problem of that is it all comes out of a celebration of the French Revolution as well. It is the birth of the modern world, but in a very bad way. Okay, they don't. And Wordsworth and Coleridge lived long enough that they started by being advocates of the French Revolution and grew out of it. Right? Because if you're not liberal when you're young, you have no heart. And if you're not conservative when you're old, you have no head, right? As Churchill said. But, Byron, Shelley, and Keats died too young to know if they ever would have grown up. It's hard to know. But Wordsworth and Coleridge lived long enough to see the destruction. And it comes out of the French, right? Oh my gosh, you have you ever gotten Carl Trueman on your show? You have to get him on there. The rise and triumph of the modern self. Carl Trueman, he shows the influence of Rousseau and the French Revolution and other things as well. And what's happened is this focus on expressive individualism and this loss of any sense of real virtue.
You mentioned Chesterton, which obviously there's only two things worth talking about: religion and politics. So let's get into a little more politics here.
Okay, go.
I found I think this is your article on from the Federalist in April 2024.
Yeah.
The opposition to Trump.
Yep.
And so I hope it's okay to talk about this.
We can talk about it. I mean,
I didn't put it in the agenda, so it is what it is.
Look, okay, I come from immigrant roots. All four of my grandparents were born in Greece. They all immigrated to America about 90 years ago, right? So we've been here almost 100 years. And, at first when Trump came on the scene, it's like, well, I can't like him. I've got a PhD, right? I got to hate this guy. But I will tell you, well, first of all, look, I grew up in New Jersey. So, all of his bad mouth, that's how people talk in New York. I mean, I'm not saying I like it, but I mean, get some thick skin. My God, I'm sorry. People are babies. But anyway, the first thing that made me stop and say, wait a minute, there is something to this guy. Okay, this sounds crazy, Rick, but I believe that almost nobody in Washington, from the left or the right, cares a darn about the blue-collar worker. They don't care about the working man. They look down, they demonize him. And I suddenly realized that Trump, this super rich guy, not only cares about the working man, he actually understands him. It was my relatives who spent their whole life working for Nabisco in Chicago that got me thinking about that. I'm like, wait a minute. Why? Why are they turning? The very same blue-collar people that went for Obama thinking he would be a savior and were very quickly disillusioned about that, they're the ones that turned and said, wait a minute, here's Trump, here is this guy. You know what it really hit me, Rick? Every time a politician goes to speak for workers, they'll always put on a hard hat to try to, and every single one of them does that, looks like an absolute moron. But when Trump does it, I don't know what it is, but it's like, yes, he understands what this means. He understands what a hard hat is for, first of all. He understands what work, and he respects people who get their hands dirty. Trump is a bully, okay? But he is a bully against the bullies, okay?
He's our bully.
Yeah, he's your bully, exactly. The stuck-up, arrogant people who think they know better, who want to manage things, the managerial people that want to do this and tell you what to do and tell you what to think and all of that stuff. And I mean, I don't drink big sodas, but I don't need the governor of New York to tell me I can't drink a big soda. Okay, I mean, it's just I don't need a nanny state, and I think that was the thing. He upset the right kind. Look, it was just like when Rush Limbaugh came along. He changed everything. And you'll probably remember, Rick, that a lot of people call themselves ditto heads, right? Ditto Rush, ditto Rush. And of course, the progressives love to say, see, that proves they're mindless. It's like, no, you don't understand what ditto means. Ditto means all my life I've believed these things, Rush, but nobody in the media ever articulated what I've known for 30 years. That's what ditto means. And that's exactly the way people are feeling to Trump. He is now finally getting to the core of what upsets people. and is articulate. That means a perfect person, okay?
A thousand places to go from here. So Donald Trump Jr. has sat in this chair before, right here in the same room. I've had Secret Service right there. I'm a little bit too close to the situation here, but I agree 100%. He
Oh yeah,
prefers
yes.
competency over purity. I think I do too. Like, I'm not looking for a priest. I'm not looking for a pope. I need someone that's going to get the job done. I'm looking for my guy, my bully. And let's stack the probabilities for a second. Let's sort of just imagine. Let's just imagine you've got 1,000 billionaires in America. So you've got like a one in 300,000 probability the man's going to be a billionaire. Then you got a New York Times bestseller. Another kind of 1 in a million type of shot. And so now you're like in the billions of probabilities now, or the trillions probably. You're talking about a top TV show in the Apprentice. He also is a very successful, probably the most successful real estate developer on the East Coast for 20 years there. And then you have this idea where he's actually ascended to the presidency, a 1 of 300 million probability there. So you stack all those probabilities. It's great. It's greater than the number of atoms in the universe, most likely. That's how you quantify the man's competency, but they don't want to look at that. They want to look at the angry treats. They want to orange man mean, all that stuff. And it's just rhetoric. After all, it's even bad rhetoric. It's not even good rhetoric.
And it's not even true. I mean, he's certainly not racist in any way, shape, or form. And now, okay, when you say the word sexist, okay, if you mean he was a lounge lizard when he was young, okay, but if you mean sexist, treating women badly, just listen to McKennedy or any of the women that worked for him. And a lot of the women that worked for him were moms, and he would work with them so that they didn't have to sacrifice their family. And they always talked about he was a good boss to work with and respected them and stuff.
I think there's a hatred for the competency as well, Lou, because I mean, can you just think about it for a second? This is a totally secular thing to say, but I'm gonna say it anyway. Like, you look at the people that are attacking, look at the men that are attacking him, and you look at the type of women that Donald Trump slept with. He had hundreds of millions of dollars in the 80s. He was young. He slept with who he wanted to. He drove what he wanted to. He had the helicopter. All of A, they're jealous, and B, they pretend they can land that kind of 10 and they're just there's no way they would have a shot. There's no way they would have a shot with the women like that and do this sorts of things and sort of do the sort of deals they would. So then they just poo-poo it all, and it's ridiculous. But
I think it just opens up. Maybe it opens up old wounds or something like that. This counteragent syndrome of people of a preacher who told me I shouldn't do that, and it's like, well, he might have been right, first of all, probably he was right that you shouldn't have done that. Okay. And it's just, I don't know. It just, like I said, it does seem to trigger something in them about. But again, it's a different kind of bullying. I mean, like I said, it actually. It did start with Rush, because Rush was one of the first people to come up with silly names for people. But you know what? He does say things like Sleepy Joe. Okay, yeah, but you know what? What the left says to him, the two worst insults you can possibly make to anyone in America right now is to say they're racist and to call them Hitler. That is and they just throw that out to him. Like they pretend like it's not an insult. They think it's a fact or something like that. Right now, look, when you talk about being practical about it, right now, our country's a mess, okay? And is there anybody that can stop this inflation? Is there anybody that will allow the kids of this generation to ever own a house? Well, the only person that could possibly do that is someone that can build a skyscraper in New York City. There is no impossible task than to grow. And he worked with all the unions, all these different people, all the corruption. Somehow he built a bunch of skyscrapers in New York City. If somebody that can do that can actually pull together the resources that it takes to fix things and to just stop this nonsense about right now. The evangelical world is being turned upside down. Reckon if you're following by a book called Shepherds for Sale by Megan. You have to make sure you get her in your show. I'm sure she'll come. And again, people are just getting focused on these tiny little things instead of getting at what is happening, okay? And it's coming through. I've seen it in the evangelical world. It didn't start with the LGBT, because any evangelical, they certainly are not going to be fooled by that. But you know what? It starts with critical race theory. It starts with that, because yes, we do have blood on our hands, okay? Especially the Baptists, right? Have blood on our hands. But that doesn't mean you allow yourself to buy into a Marxist understanding of humanity that says we are merely members of a group, that there is no individual responsibility. It's forgetting what Solzhenitsyn said: the dividing line between good and evil is between every human being. And right now, today, there is no systemic racism in our country today. But I'll tell you what there is systemic. There is what I call systemic progressivism in our public schools, where every single aspect of the public school is owned by this progressive mindset. They own the teaching colleges. They own the exams that you have to take. They own the boards of education. All of this sort of stuff is just crushing education. One of the things I speak for more than anything, Rick, is for classical Christian schools all over the country. This movement has been a wonderful way of, raising up, again, virtuous, morally self-regulating citizens and all these sorts of things. And that's really important, and it needs to be done. But I just don't understand how can anybody with Biden or Harris or any of these people, okay, that I just I don't understand. I mean, look, even my friend Eric, whom I love, a lot of times people on the right overuse the word evil. Okay, we have to be careful we don't overuse that word. But what's happening with transgenderism is evil. Okay, it is evil because it is tearing down the imago Dei. It is tearing down the image of God. It is tearing down the masculinity and femininity with we are created. It is leading to, I mean, they're putting kids on puberty blockers. I mean, maybe it's not 1 million people, but if it's 1,000 people, that's too much. Okay.
Yes.
Kids that are being destroyed, that even if they stop, they're going to be rendered infertile for the rest of their life. That is evil. It is actually an attack on our nature, a hatred of that nature. And so the word for that is appropriately evil. And again, both Harris and Walsh are in favor of that.
And we're recording this a week after Elon Musk was interviewed. It said that he was tricked into signing something so that his kid would take that sort of medicine, and he lost his son, and he was so furious. He realized it was such an evil thing. This non-Christian, non-theist spent $30 billion to buy Twitter, turned it into X. Why? Because he said he would dedicate his life to destroying wokeness.
Wow. Now, is that true? Because I saw that.
Yes, I watched that interview. Yes.
Now, I did see a good Babylon Bee version of that, though, where it says, in order to establish free speech, Elon Musk has just bought the UK. So I thought that was great. Now, that's a joke. But who knows? Maybe that's the next thing. But now, what did his son commit suicide? Is that how his son died?
His son just so he lost his son. He doesn't have a son anymore.
He's still alive, though.
Yeah. I forgot what it's called. It's called like blank killing or something. There's some term for that.
Oh, okay.
Where you lose the child, so the child loses his identity.
They did, right?
Is what happens. And I think the real you started this comment, this talk about Trump on the idea of the blue collarness. I don't think Trump just likes the blue collar. I think they love him and he loves them back.
Yeah, he does. I'm sincere.
Yes. He really is. It's a love relationship with the blue collar people who give him an honest shot and listen to what he's saying. Don't listen to the media. And that just infuriates Kamala and the whole group over there.
They believe they stand for the common man. And I'm glad he chose Vance. I'm like, the guy that wrote Hillbilly Elegy? I didn't even know he was a senator. But you know what? At least a lot of conservatives, finally understand how the policy, starting with LBJ, how all those policies just destroyed the inner city black family. I mean, just unpacked it and destroyed it. What people don't understand is those policies did the same thing to poor white people in Kentucky and Tennessee and West Virginia. It's the same. Now, we don't hear about it as much because most of those people, at least they're not strung out on crack and in gangs causing, but most of them, they just destroy themselves by taking opioids until they're just gone. So people don't hear about it as much. But, vast amounts of people in these states are just being destroyed, giving into despair, all of that sort of stuff. And we don't understand that this is what is happening, and nobody seems to care. And a lot of the black conservatives are I've got a lot of friends who are black conservatives. They're the most lonely people in our country right now. Oh my gosh, when I talk to them and they talk about the way they're treated by their friends and what they say to them, it's like unbelievable. Okay. I wish we could have Ben Carson as president. I was watching some of your interview with him. He came and spoke at my university. He's phenomenal. Okay.
Yes.
I mean, it's just it's and I mean Clarence Thomas is sort of the soul of our country right now, and we need that sort of stuff. See that what and what's hard, and even I'm not good enough to do this. Maybe Rick, you're a little bit better, but what's so unique about Thomas Sowell and Jordan Peterson, what's unique about them is that both you and I can make a lot of the arguments they make and do it in a good theoretical way. But what we can't, maybe you, I don't know, what I can't do is Thomas Sowell has all of the facts memorized, and Jordan Peterson has all of the literature. First of all, I refuse to read anything with statistics. I just hate social sciences, so I'm not going there. Maybe you can do that. But what I'm saying is, those people may intimidate me because I don't know all the statistics, but they can't intimidate Peterson. He knows exactly what the statistics say about men and women, and Sowell knows exactly the statistics about what people are shot, white, but there's not that many people like that, because anybody that goes through the kind of education necessary to memorize all that is usually been completely brainwashed by wokeness. That's why Peterson is so unique, thank God he's there. Have you had him on your show yet? You got to get him.
I have not. Actually, it's interesting you say that. So just got through another round of beta readers, and one of the beta readers, Scott Baker, he was the co-founder with Glenn Beck on the Blaze Network.
Oh yeah.
And he actually line edited both of Jordan Peterson's books. And what he was saying, we were doing debrief last week. He was like, Rick, don't take this wrong, but Jordan Peterson has been lecturing for 30 years before anyone even knew who he was. Like every day for 30 years. And I'm watching you communicate. I'm like, man, if I could communicate half as well, Lou, I would be great. But you've been doing it for 20 years.
I've been doing it too, but like I said, I do it so I can talk about the issues. But to be able to just throw out all these statistics. Well, like I said, I don't even know if I trust statistics anymore. But like I said, Peterson knows the actual literature. Almost everybody accepts if they're willing to. They accept it, but they're not willing to see what it means. That kind of stuff. So I just immerse myself in the ancients and the people that, actually were able to see these things. And when I see something in Thucydides that's exactly the same today, the corruption of language that was happening during the Peloponnesian War is exactly the same thing happening today. I'm like,
yeah. And a lot of the same themes are coming up. They're coming back up from Plato, where he says it'll be a time when the good will be called evil, which is sort of reflective of the judgment of Pilate, the most perfect man. I'm going to condemn him as evil, and we're going to put him to death, although we know he's good. Like we're going to change the definitions of things, the Olympics, right? We're going to create additional categories, and from there we're going to be able to blur so there's no difference. And there's a pathway there, and it comes out of the 1960s UCLA School of Law. I mean, they're trying to remove categories. They're creating extra categories, and they're just going to blur them all. And then from there, they're going to start changing the definition that they've already changed. You see this happen, the Shepherds for Sale book. I want to go back to that here in a second, because it's a couple of Baptist guys, and we're looking at I'm hearing what was said about Greer, and you kind of look at what's been happening, and the other 4 of the 5 top denominations, this idea that we're going to forget that 1 Timothy chapter 2 exists, that there is no Pauline commandment, that women have certain roles and men have other roles. They're equal, but they have other roles. We're going to ignore that because it's not fair. And then once we ignore that that the men and the women are basically the same, then we can introduce the other steps, the LGBTQ plus agendas. We can do that, but we have to do that first. If we can destroy definitions, we can do that. So we can not only destroy the church, but we can also destroy the family in the same move. It's the exact same strategy to destroy the hierarchy of the church, but also the linear landscape of the family all at once.
Basically, equality, a good thing, becomes egalitarianism or equity, which is a terrible thing. I mean, destructive thing. It's, I guess, it's got a provocative title, Shepherds for Sale. She's not saying all of these people are literally taking handouts, but what they're not realizing is they're using curriculum that is slowly breaking down any resistance to modern progressive ideas. And I've read Christianity Today cover to cover for 25 years. I just stopped about 3 years ago. I just stopped. It's ridiculous what's going on. Now, there is some hopes. There are some younger people, like a lot of people have talked about the Gospel Coalition is going bad. I've had less problem with them because a lot of times I work and I write with younger guys. I mean, about age 30. And a lot of these guys are coming back to a family focus. Sometimes when I've got somebody my age, 50 or 60, who's trying to gender neutral my language, which nobody does, I'm just not going to publish it. And sometimes it'll be the 30-year-old that will come to my defense. So there's something good coming back there again. There are some people that are slinging back around and, learning again the importance of and just how these things hang together. I just I don't know. Like I said, I am worried about that because it's just like an idea like climate control. It is hurting poor people more than it's hurting rich people. It's hurting third world more than it's hurting the first world. I mean, these are the people that are suffering because of this virtue signaling that says let's just do something. Right. Amazingly enough, Michael Moore, that crazy guy that does those things, he actually produced, he didn't direct it, but he produced a documentary called Planet of the Humans, where watch it if he showed that these so-called alternate energies end up causing more problems than the fossil fuel. What are you doing? I don't know. Just think about it this way. I work with a lot of, churches and different things, and a lot of these new churches or new schools, they'll bond together and they'll rent place in a church and they'll start their school until they can raise enough money to build their own school or their own church. Well, guess what, Rick? 3 years ago, they could maybe do that with $1 million. Now it's at least $2 million. And you think it's hard to raise $1 million? How are you going to raise $2 million? I mean, it's literally between COVID and Bidenomics. I mean, literally everything is skyrocketed.
Do you do any work with the Second Baptist Classical Education School?
Oh, they've got a new classical school, and I actually did their graduation last year, a year and a half ago.
Did you happen to run into either the Dollins there?
Oh, I think so. What was the name again?
Bo Dollins.
Yes, I did. Bo's the guy that brought me out. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, really? Okay. Yeah, he's one of my very best friends.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. If I see
yeah. I think when you were watching, depending on which Ben Carson video you watched, I think he was in the audience.
Oh, that's good. Okay.
Yeah,
oh, okay.
yeah.
He's good. They're doing a good job at that school, and it's really growing. And we need that. I mean, it's just, and here's the funny thing. I mean, I'm always writing about bringing Athens and Jerusalem together, our Judeo-Christian and Greco-Roman, they come together. And the proof that God has a sense of humor, it says Jesus wept, but it never says Jesus laughed. But the proof that God has a sense of humor is that the great pagan classics, I mean, Homer and Virgil and Plato and Aristotle and Aeschylus, Sophocles, all these great writers, okay? At the very moment they're being thrown out by the so-called Ivy League schools, they shouldn't even be allowed to call that. At the same time, God has raised up the least likely people imaginable to preserve the pagan classics. And I mean, conservative homeschoolers, right? The people that used to be Bible only when I was a kid. So God has a sense of humor, okay? We're starting to realize what we need to learn from these great works, okay? About virtue, about the proper way to live. So we need to be anchored by that. I mean, again, why is everybody immigrating to our country? It's because of the system that we have. Look, let me just throw this out because I think your listeners will be interested in this. Again, this idea of the great books as a kind of Western colonialization. Okay, let's step back, okay? Whenever they talk about white people, okay, they don't really mean me, okay? They don't mean Greeks or Italians or Irish or Polish or Jewish, right? I think Hitler would be amazed that Jews are now white people. That's kind of interesting, according to the new identity politics. But anyway, what they mean by white people were Anglo. They were the British, the French, the Germans. Okay. Now, we need to understand that what we call the great tradition, the great books that they're trying to throw out, okay, they were not originally created by the British, French, and German. They were created in the Mediterranean world by the Greeks, the Italians. Some of them are North Africans. Some of them are near East, near Asia. Okay, that's where it comes from. Okay, the first people, Rick, to be colonized by the great books were the British, French, and German and Viking barbarians. Okay, because they absorbed that tradition, they became great and then passed that tradition on to other people. Since I told you half my students are Hispanic, I think the most important thing I do is try to show my Latino students that Homer, Virgil, and Dante, that is your tradition as well. It is not owned by England, okay? It is the tradition that was brought over. It's the good thing. It's the good thing that came out of conquistadores and things like that, right? Hold on to this good thing. And so we need to understand that's what made them great. And any culture that has been seeded by this Greco-Roman Judeo-Christian has tended to do well. The great democracy that Gandhi built was because he studied that, okay? The All India Congress was established by the British, all of these sorts of things. And, we make fun of the Victorians, but the Victorian age was the Christian moral age because they were realizing that as the aristocrats, like Lord Byron, as they were getting more and more corrupt and were corrupting anybody, that's when they started to raise up the middle class as the new aristocracy, because it was an aristocracy of moral and ethical and virtuous behavior. That doesn't mean they were perfect. They were also sinners like any of us are. But they were the ones, it was the British that were the first one to really establish things to take care of the poor and stuff like that. I mean, the early church did it, but to do it on a government level, and, of course, that got corrupt as well as anything can do. But that's what it started, this idea of virtue and of the teaching of virtue, when you look at history that way.
Is anyone doing this sort of work from the Eastern perspective, from the Egyptian perspective, from the Vedic traditions? I mean, is there stuff coming out of that sort of thing? Because I'm thinking about, Pharaoh Akhenaten. I'm thinking about the Vedic traditions.
I mean, the best place to start is a book by Don Richardson. He died about 5 or 6 years ago. He wrote a book called Eternity in Their Hearts, and he shows how there are glimmers of monotheism all over the place. He was a missionary in Papua New Guinea. He wrote a book called The Peace Child. That was his most famous book, his autobiography too. But Eternity in Their Hearts by Don Richardson. But again, see, when I wrote my book From Plato to Christ, I said, I want some Chinese guy to write From Confucius to Christ. Or I want somebody to write From Buddha to Christ. I mean, because if what I do in all of my writing is true, then there's going to be seeds of this in every single place. Right? You're going to, if you look for it, you're going to find it. You're going to find it in Native American Indians. You're going to find it in the Aborigines. You're going to find it in the ancient Chinese. And he talks about some of that in the book, some of the things that we find in those areas. Because, see, it's crazy, Rick. If you go on atheist websites, their biggest argument against Christianity is, well, Jesus sounds a lot like Dionysus. That's the whole point, by the way, of the Olympic ceremonies. He sounds an awful lot like Bacchus. He sounds an awful lot like Osiris. It must be a mistake. No, you're missing the whole point. Okay, look, if Christianity is true, then Jesus is not just the Jewish Messiah. If he was only the Jewish Messiah, nothing else, then that's only a message for 1% of the population. He's also the Savior of the world. And so, in the same way that Jesus fulfills the Old Testament law and prophets, I would argue, along with Lewis and a lot of others, C.S. Lewis, that he also fulfills the highest yearnings of the pagan people. He is the Savior of the world. If Jesus came into the world and he spoke to the Jews, but had nothing whatsoever to say to anybody else, it would be like a foreign god had invaded the world. But that's not the case. There are seeds preparing people. And again, because they're just seeds, sometimes they come up with really bloody, nasty myths. But there is an understanding of a need for God to come to earth, of an understanding of life and death and rebirth that's actually written into the seasons. By the way, Rick, if all the great writers, Shakespeare and Chaucer and all these people and Dante, if they lived in Houston, they never would have written anything great, because great books are based on an understanding of the seasonal cycle of life, death, and rebirth. And where we live, we only have, 8 months of summer and 4 months of indecision. We don't really have a seasonal cycle. So, I'm glad I grew up somewhere else and learned a little wisdom before I came down here. But anyway, so yeah, I do believe it's going to be there. That there's, and you just gave an example earlier that I've got to look into now about Alexander the Great. I think we're going to find that.
I'll send you the reference on that via email.
Yeah, send me the reference, because I think that's fascinating. I mean, the story was that he went into the Egyptian desert. What was that place called? Kukunan. Well, anyway, he went and spoke there, and it seems to be that they revealed to him that he was actually the son of Zeus.
Oh, Delphi.
Yeah, what was it?
On his way to Delphi.
But he also went to a place in Egypt where they probably seemed to tell him that he was also the son of the Egyptian god, who was, statistically with that. Siwa, that's where it's Siwa, Siwa, where he met. And then he declared himself pharaoh and stuff like that. But again, it's just an inkling, a glimmer of what is to come. I mean, first of all, if Daniel's prophecy sort of necessitates what happened. I mean, look, okay, we talk about Rome, okay, but Rome wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Alexander the Great. Now, Alexander the Great wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for the golden age of. But look, okay, everything that I teach from the 5th century BC Athens, if it wasn't for Alexander the Great, we might have lost all of it,
Yes.
right? Because Alexander the Great took the Hellenism, the best of Hellenism that he learned from his tutor Aristotle, and spread it throughout the world. That's why and then of course that led to the Library of Alexandria. He laid the foundation for it. He didn't build it, but that's where it was preserved. All of this sort of stuff. So there would have been no Rome because it was Alexander the Great that taught them what a world empire was and what it meant to have a cross-cultural kind of world. And that's the world that the gospel was born into. I mean, have you seen the statistic? It was like 10,000 miles that Paul traveled along the Roman roads and also the Roman waterways. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
Yes.
But all of that, Jesus came in the fullness of time. Okay, he was born during the reign of Caesar Augustus, who referred to himself as the Prince of Peace because he brought the Pax Romana, the longest reign of peace the Western world has known. And he also called himself the Son of God because he was the adopted son of Julius Caesar, who was deified after he died. So he called himself the Son of God. Right? So during that period is when Jesus is born. And the fullness of time means he was not only born during a time of Roman roads and safety and ingenuity, he was also born during a time of Greek philosophy. That doesn't mean the Greek philosophy got everything right, but God planned it that way, and it gave us a language to express these things.
So you introduced this idea a few minutes ago about this idea of seeds. There are seeds in all these cultures, right? There are seeds planted. Christ is the Krishna of the Vedic tradition who actually was able to successfully have peace, but also speaks wisdom while he's driving the chariot. Like Christ is sort of I think it's, from my perspective, it's appropriate to say that Christ is not a type of archetype. He is the archetype.
No, good. That's the word for that is ectype.
Define that for us, opposite.
Yeah, he is the form out of which every story of a dying and rising God is a very dim, sometimes twisted, sometimes perverse reflection of the act. Because first of all, what does it say in the Bible? Jesus was sacrificed from the foundation of the world, right? I mean, he's always been there. The pre-incarnate Christ.
So, all right. So let me. I see two possible theories about how these seeds got here. How these seeds got here. It's very similar to like the alien theory. The first theory is like this codified in our DNA, or it was sort of planted here at creation, right? We have this propensity to create these sort of stories. And the second idea, and I haven't found anyone else that thinks this, but this is sort of a wild idea that I propagate, is this idea, and it's borrowed a little bit from Lewis, about this idea of Christ striking down from outside of nature into nature like lightning. That if the lightning bolt, sort of the Zeusian lightning bolt, was strong enough, and it came from outside of time into time, then that would ripple not only forward in time but also backward in time, because it would be a timeless type of idea that would happen, and it would propagate itself forward and backward in time. And then also obviously across all the different hierarchies, because he is the full embodiment of all the top and the bottom of hierarchy,
right?
In different cases. And so I lean toward that second theory because it seems to me the most obvious from a time perspective.
Huh. And it's interesting too, because maybe you're thinking about, Lewis talks about, how what we call the harrowing of hell, when Jesus went down and preached to those in prison, right? And Lewis says, well, you know what? That moment, that preaching to the prisoners happened in eternal time. So in some sense, there is no prisoner to whom Jesus has not preached, which gives me a lot of hope for those that die without any chance of knowing Christ or whatever. Maybe they will be preached to in that eternal moment. Which is that moment? Because Lewis, again, we don't understand what time. Eternity is not time going on forever. Eternity means no time. It's just always now in eternity. Right?
Yes,
so
yes.
It's a fascinating idea that it's got a ripple effect that works backwards and forwards. And Dante meets. Aeneid Book 2 is when Virgil tells the tragic story of the fall of Troy. And as Troy is being burned to the ground, in one verse, Virgil said, and then so-and-so was killed, and his name was Ripheus, the most just of the Trojans. That's it. And then Dante, because Virgil is God, Dante decided, okay, he must have known something. And so he tells a story in Paradiso that Ripheus had a dream in which he had a dream of Christ crucified. And he put his faith in that dream and was saved. And that's why he's in heaven. So Dante may be, following along with this idea too, that there are ramifications back and forth in time, which I think is kind of a neat idea.
So I'm going to send you this William Whiston story. And again, he says Eusebius and also Josephus both report some of this about Alexander the Great. I personally believe if there's a high probability that Alexander the Great was a prophet and that he was sort of in the Platonic form, not the Platonic form, but the Platonic ideal, looking forward to an unnamed man, because unknown from the kind of black swan theory, this great event. But even more than that, I would submit for your consideration after you read this, right after the howling of hell, when Christ reascends up, the earthquake shatters and creates the storms, and the same steps that led him down into the depths of hell, but also steps that are going to lead us back up out of our own hell. And then when he leads us all back up, and it said that across Jerusalem there were the prophets and the priests that were walking in Jerusalem for a number of days because the earthquake had happened, right? They'd risen from the dead. They were walking around proclaiming and preaching. I would submit for your consideration, it's possible that Alexander the Great was one of the people that were up, raised from the dead.
Oh, wow. That's wild.
That's a possibility.
I mean, because nobody. That's the strangest episode of the Gospels. Nobody knows what to make of it, but that's an interesting concept.
So think about Whiston. When you read Whiston, think about John chapter 4. Think about what happens in Samaria with Alexander the Great, and put all that together. Man, he's tracing Christ. He is tracing Christ. He's tracking down. He's just 300 years too early. He's the Isaiah to Plato.
Right.
He's just early.
Like I said, I mean, when Plato talks about the perfectly just man who was killed, I think he basically says he's impaled to death. I think it's like he's seeing Christ. I mean, he does have Socrates in mind, obviously, but it's like he's seeing something, looking forward to this. The story of Prometheus, bound to there, is like a force, and he's saved by Hercules, who is the son of Zeus, who is probably the greatest of all the demigods. Hercules, Christ figure.
Yeah, and if you do a study of when crucifixion was introduced, the impaling is the crucifixion. The crucifixion is later introduced. You've got Alexander that begins to introduce in that sort of part of the world, and obviously it's instantiated through the crucifixion of the 6,000 slaves, or that Italian boot. Yeah, the Spartacus story. Yeah. That's when it becomes really, really known. But then you've got 800 years before, then also 370 years before Plato, where there's this impaling. You got the Isaiah 53, and you also have they're both prophesying the idea that doesn't exist yet in this part of the world of crucifixion.
Yeah, I mean, they do have impaling. I mean, Haman was impaled and all that stuff. But yeah, the way they describe, all my bones are out of whack. I feel like wax. I mean, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Psalm 22. It does. It reads like an eyewitness account. But maybe prophetically, they just saw it, because it's all now up in heaven. I don't think God put the revelation in John's head. I think it's more like God took John up into the throne room and said, "Look around." Took him up into the eternal space to look around, and it would be confusing. I don't think John could explain everything he wrote, because he just wrote down what he saw. In eternal tone, we're not used to looking at eternity when everything is now. We're used to past, present, and future. It's all we've ever known. But we get glimpses of eternity in those moments, those perfect, pure moments when we're sort of hanging in suspension. And I think we get a glimpse, because, as Lewis says, the present moment is where time and eternity touch for a moment, is in that moment, that frozen moment that has everything. But the world is stranger than we know. I mean, it's just, there are, I can't remember. I wish, one of my friends who used to be Hindu was telling me about some of these early Vedas that talk about this other person that's going to come. I mean, there are glimpses of these things. I think everywhere we look. I mean, like Lewis says, people say miracles are impossible because they violate the laws of nature, and you can't violate the laws of nature. It's like, listen, if I pick up a really heavy vase and I open my hand, it's going to fall and shatter because of the law of gravity. But what about if after I drop it, my other hand reaches in and grabs it? Have I broken the law of gravity? No, I've only suspended it temporarily, right? I mean, every person that Jesus healed in Palestine eventually died. Okay, the virgin birth, God reached directly into the womb, like He did with Adam in that sense, right? And put it. But the moment that happened, everything else was naturalized, and Mary had a normal 9-month pregnancy and gave birth. Right. So Lewis is saying, I don't know if you were referring to this before, but people talk about turning water into wine. That's impossible. Lewis says, excuse me, every day water turns into wine. It just takes a long, long time. And right. But when the creator of nature steps in and does it in a flash, the mask is often, we see the miracle that's there that we never noticed before. Right. I mean, our body, in a sense, heals itself. Right. But when Jesus does it in a moment, He reveals the creative power He put into creation, which has been subjected to futility, but which will in the end be reconstituted, having something to do with us, the sons of God, having our resurrection bodies, and everything will be restored and glorified. Wonderful as we look forward to that. I mean, I believe this is similar to you, Rick. Maybe I believe too that, okay, you know the phrase, in Adam's fall, we sinned all. All of us participate in the sin. That's original sin. Every real Christian believes it, whether they call it original sin, total depravity. We all participate in the sin of Adam. I would argue if we participate in Adam's sin, then we must also participate in the 1 or 2 days or 6 hours that he was in the Garden of Eden. I think we have an prenatal memory of Eden, not literally in our head, but
Wow.
that's why, look, everybody you talk to says the world should be better than it is. Why do you say that? The world has never been better than it is. Unless, but of course, the world was better than it is. Well, the Garden of Eden, however long that lasted. But what I'm saying is, I think we have a memory of it. We have a sense of the way things should be. And that's why we're always uneasy. That's why some people get warped and try to build utopia, either in a good way or a bad way, because we have that memory, right? And whether you're a conservative and you want to go back to a lost paradise, or you're a progressive and you want to go forward and build utopia, we all have this sense that the world should be better than it is, that we should be better than we are. Right? That's unshakable. How could how could how could how could nature create in us a yearning for something that nature knows nothing about? Right? As Lewis says, if pure evolution is true, then we live in an enclosed universe and all there is nature. But that's not what it says, right? I mean, that all of our yearnings point beyond that to something supernatural or metaphysical, trans world. Wow. It's good to talk about, huh?
Good. Yeah, it's fun. That's fun. Well, Lou, tell folks how they can connect with you online. Obviously, we're going to link to your Amazon bookstore.
Just go to Amazon.com and type in Louis Markos, Markos. It's a Greek name, and you'll see my Amazon author page and my emails there as well. And also, if you go to YouTube and type in my name, I've got a YouTube channel with some stuff I put, not as professional as your stuff, but I've put some of my lectures up there for people that are interested. But I've got I'll just mention that I've got a. Here, I'll throw this out just because I'm usually writing about ancient Greece and Rome, but just this summer I published a new book called My Life in Film: How the Movie Shaped My Soul. So anybody that wants to understand what it was like in the old days, the 1930s and 1940s was the golden age of Hollywood. What was so special about those movies? What's missing? I take up 20 movies from the golden age and talk about not only why they're great, but how they affected me as a person and shaped my understanding of things. Casablanca, Citizen Kane, Wuthering Heights, it's Mr. Smith Goes to Hawaii, It's a Wonderful Life, lots of movies like that. But the new book comes out in the fall, Passing the Torch, an apology for classical Christian education, talking about why this kind of education is important. And finally, the book you held up, I think my probably most popular, The Myth Made Fact. I retell 50 myths from ancient mythology and then talk about how they move forward. The other was Plato to Christ. And the myth made fact is you can use it if you're like a homeschooling mom or a classical Christian school, because I also have lots of questions at the end. It's also good for church groups, like Sunday school reading groups and stuff like that. So I'm always keeping busy and trying to keep up with things like that. But it is important, like I said, I'm not a narrowly what do they call partisan politics person. I don't usually talk about. We're at a point where what is going on? We cannot continue in the craziness of what we're doing. And you know what? You destroy our economy, you destroy the world's economy. I mean, look, we did overdo that thing that happened a couple Mondays ago. That wasn't the worst crash in all time, but still, it caused ripple effects that were much worse in other parts of the world. So if you really care about the rest of the world, then we need to fix up our own, system and get things going and come back to it. I think it's possible. And I do think that we've got a whole lot of immigrants here that want to be part of that, not this crazy progressive dream that we're building. They came here for the same reason my grandparents came in here, for a place where you could raise your family with freedom and worship God and freedom and stuff like that. That's what they wanted, and I think we'd like to see that restored. There's a whole bunch of young women that actually are conservative and would love to be able to full-time raise their children. But the economy that's being destroyed right now is not going to make that possible. They're not going to be able to have a house. So I mean, it is important. I might sound like a Chicken Little running around. The sky is falling, but we are at a crossroads that's really kind of scary. So keep it up there, folks. Keep reading, and like I said, it's all in Plato. That's what Professor Kirk says in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. It's all in Plato. What do they teach these children these days?
Thank you for leaving us that hope and inspiration, Lou. Folks, click on the link below. Order a few of those. The movie book sounds fantastic for Christmas, for parents, for grandparents, for brothers and sisters. So buy a few of those. And be sure to like and subscribe and check out Lou on his YouTube channel as well. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it, Lou.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me on.